Good morning. Wow, great to be up here and seeing no one. But we know you're here, so that's good. We were asked to do this, yeah? And what's the best thing you can do to entertain an audience like yourselves? You put two salespeople on stage, right? Because what do techies love more than anything else? Being sold to. Yeah? So we thought it's a great idea before the break to put the two of us on stage to talk about how to accelerate time to value.
Exactly.
Before we do that, however, we'd love to introduce ourselves so you know that who you're dealing with for the next 29 minutes. And maybe we finish early so we can enjoy a longer break. My name is Fabian. I run the revenue team at Ververica, which is basically the sales team, but also the technical pre-sales team. And I've been doing this for the last 15 years, not at Ververica, but in different capacities. And I unfortunately have to admit that I used to be a techie. So 10 years ago, I used to do a talk on a technology called Apache Kylin at an event called Berlin Buzzwords, which was open source event. It's still going. It's a good community. And I turned to the dark side in the last 10 years. But I still sympathize with most of you people. Now, there's an additional thing I want to add before I hand it over to Gallo, which is we promised our team something. And I hope that we can get this going. I just want to tell a story that we got standing ovations from a techie audience. So if we would all please stand up after we finish our talk and just pretend to do a standing ovation, that would be incredibly helpful because it's just a cool story to tell. With that, let me hand over to Gallo to introduce himself.
Awesome. Really excited to see everyone standing up and clapping. That's just going to make my day. But for those who don't know me, I'm Gallo. I'm part of the go-to-market team at Aiven. If you're wondering where my name is coming from Ecuador, it's a little bit far, and you pronounce it Gallo. If you think about how the market has been changing, and I think I'm just going to introduce, just to get a little bit more familiar with us. I don't think actually, has anyone heard about Aiven? Can you just raise your hand? Awesome, awesome. Let's get more engaging. Is anyone using Kafka? I see some people maybe were a bit lazy to raise their hands. It's okay. But for those who are not familiar with Aiven, basically, we have a data platform where we've decided to consolidate the most popular open source technologies. You probably have heard about Postgres, ClickHouse, OpenSearch, Grafana, and of course, Kafka. So for the sake of saving you, to get interested, we're just going to talk about Kafka mostly. We're working with some of the customers like Decathlon, Volt, Delivery Hero, Priceline, that really need that real time to data. I'm really excited to talk about this partnership. It's something that we've been really vocal about, and it just really makes sense. Fabian, what do you think about the partnership?
Yeah, I'd love to think about so why are we working together? Why are we doing this? Because we felt like there is a particular challenge that needs to be addressed, especially amongst technical folks like ourselves in the room here. And that is that we as technology people, we think about outputs. Yeah, we think about how do we make things faster, how do we make things better. But the people that we want the money from, they care more about outcomes. Yeah, they care about how much revenue did this drive, how much risk did this reduce. So they just focus on very different metrics. And we just thought, so what is it though that if you'd go and speak to a CIO or to a board member, what they would say? And pretty much universally what they told us was, we want people to focus on innovation. But we don't want them to focus on things where we do not, let's say, create a distinctive advantage for our company, as in operating open source, which is why companies like ourselves exist. And the other thing that people say, and now I'll teach you a German word. Who's German here in the audience? Wow, there's quite a few Germans. So I'm talking about the word for schlimmbessern. For those of you who are not Germans, it's a German concept that basically means you try to improve something and thereby making it worse. And that's what we see with a lot of, say, companies trying to run open source technologies, specifically in combination at a certain scale or get it to production fast. And that's why we teamed up. And Gallo will talk more about, let's say, how we integrate sort of with the Aiven offering. But the idea is effectively to give you guys like one throat to choke in a way, yeah, to get started on a rather complicated technology stack, but focus on the things that matter most to your respective business, which is to provide business innovation, but using community innovation, yeah, Apache, open source, wherever you want, and let us focus on the infrastructure side of the house, making sure it's secure, it's managed, right, it scales, it integrates with other services, and it's also simple from a commercial standpoint. Now, with that, let me hand it over to Gallo to talk a little bit more about it in detail.
Yeah, and I think something that we've been seeing really with our customers is really, they've been using Kafka. They're really experts in Kafka users. They've been using our managed Kafka, and they really love it. But at one point, they were wondering, how can we use this data and enrich it? How can we make sure that we're getting the most of our data of our real-time pipeline? How can we deliver personalized experience to our customers? How can we create anomaly detection use cases? And I think you've seen probably some of those use cases, right, Fabian?
Yeah, I mean, use cases, I tell you what, over the last 2 days, I learned so many new use cases. Like in sales school, yeah, sales 101 school, you're typically told you need to learn everything about use cases. I was blown away how many things, how many new use cases originated over the last few years, and specifically over the last 2 days, I learned quite a few. Because, why do I say that? Because I think the use case landscape has changed as well. Because about 10 years ago, I was talking a lot about fraud detection, fraud prevention, fraud detection, mainframe offloading, customer 360, and they're still very much prominent use cases today. But now, we had an exchange earlier where we were debating about a company that would basically, it's basically uploading videos to a content delivery network, and whoever gets to upload and categorizes the video stream the fastest is basically the winner. So there's only one winner and there's multiple losers. And it's just such a fascinating real-time use case where you combine all of these different sets of elements, but it's effectively a user-driven change on the use case. Because that is not a business requirement that made them do that. It is us all using smartphones, smartwatches, all these fancy devices to basically drive into a real-time world. Because the other thing that happened is ChatGPT, unfortunately, as sort of like a technology innovation, it gave us one thing, which is the expectation that an answer on a complex question needs to come almost instantaneously. And that's a problem, right? Because all of a sudden, you take your traditional use cases, but you combine it with user expectations, and net new use cases come out of that. And that makes it even harder to manage infrastructure because you have to implement and integrate more and more systems. They are more complicated to manage, you have to build more connections, then the whole public, private, hybrid cloud world doesn't make it any easier as well, combined with regulations, and we are in a whole mess on how do I actually bring innovation to the business. That is why, yeah, folks like Aiven can definitely help to accelerate that time to value journey.
Yeah, exactly, and when we're looking at the different partnership landscape, we were thinking about how can we make sure that our customers that are using our managed Kafka and real-time infrastructure are getting the insights that they want? And the reality was the most easiest, seamless way, more robust way was really to partner someone with like Ververica. And this is the reason why this partnership is so strong and I'm so excited about it is we're able to deliver what our customers really want. And they're able to get the insights and those business cases that they're looking for. And we also heard a little bit about just before we joined here on stage, we had the PMC, and then we're discussing really some of the really great things they're working on, some of the connectors, how Flink is working, the new version of Flink. And when you see how the open source community is really strong about Kafka, about Flink, I wanted to ask you, Fabian, how do you see the open source in Ververica?
Yeah. First and foremost, I'm a strong believer in open source, but I'm a believer in using open source for the right reasons. And that is something that is an odd thing to say for a company who sells a commercial product. Yeah, because every company wants to make money somewhere, and it's very difficult on pure open source. But what we decided, and I think what the trend in the industry is, that what people actually want to use or want to leverage is open source innovation. Yeah, because it allows us to build a community around something and exchange ideas on a common set and a common ground. Now, what happens a lot of the times, and what we're seeing is that the people who are responsible for a certain open source project also think they are the ones who operate it end to end, which I totally get. It makes sense. I also want to understand my tech, but I cannot repair my car anymore. My 15 years old car, I could definitely open up, say, the engine and could still fix things. If I do it now with my car, it's basically a black box. Yeah, I need to have special devices, so it's very difficult to do these things. And the same is true with technology as they merge in complexity. So combining open source as an innovation driver to drive business innovation, that's great. But managing it all the way down to the infrastructure is literally a waste of time and effort, because that is not where the efficiency gains are made when working with open source technologies. And I think that's specifically what we are seeing when we talk to, say, senior leaders within organizations. They tell us, if I would only had a chance to have all these smart people, the folks in the room, yeah, to work on the things that would make a material difference to my business and not spend time on things that do not make a difference, it would be a great thing to do. And that is why we kind of said, how do we make this happen? And so Aiven, so a lot of people here in the room know Aiven. I shouldn't ask the question who knows Ververica, because if anybody wouldn't raise their arms, that would be very odd after these 2 days. But combining the forces makes it basically possible to deploy a rather complex set of infrastructure and get to innovation, as in driving applications, data to the next frontier to support the business without having to think about the hassle of how do I set up whitelisting? How do I do firewall rules? How do I work on things that are not in my core expertise? And that's what we are basically trying to simplify for you guys together with this partnership.
Yeah, and for those who know Aiven, you know that open source is really in the heart of the company. So all of our services we're providing, from Postgres to ClickHouse, we have open source committees. They're able to drive innovation in some of these technologies. And I don't know if you recently heard about the announcement of Diskless Kafka. It's something that we were really felt strong about it, because we know that it already exists, but we wanted to make sure that we deliver it as a managed service, but also give back to the community, because the community should also be able to deploy this if they want to do it. So this is why when Aiven was thinking about how can we make also innovation in real-time data and innovation in the open source and Kafka, when we decided to announce this list, we actually pushed it out to the community. We made a proposal. We said, hey guys, we've been able to scale Kafka to the size that some of the customers really want. And I think it's just, we've made that proposal. We want to make sure that open source is on the heart of it. Everyone can enjoy it. And it's just, that's why the partnership is so powerful, because while we're trying to innovate in real-time data and making sure that customers are getting these use cases at scale, we're also being able to deliver the other requirements, where like stream processing. And here's where Ververica really comes in, because they are supporting that side.
Now I have a question for you, because over the last 2 days, I had a lot of people who tell me, look, it's very difficult for me to convince my, say, let's just call them people with money, yeah, to do the right things, because I know how to do the things right, but they want me to do the right things. How is Aiven sort of helping companies to, or help developers, the technical audiences, to convince a business audience to invest in something that looks like something new and not a kid on the block, but actually helps the productivity of all the smart people around us in the room here?
Oh, I think it's a really good question. And this is always the question we're always asking. How are we linking these technical problems, and how are we linking those to real business use cases? And the most of the time, it really comes down to one thing. We know that there's really capable technical people to be able to run themselves, and they do an amazing job. But what we're trying to look at it on the business perspective is, what we're trying to do is, we want to make sure that you guys are using these technologies, but not having to do the hassle of managing it. We just want to make sure that you're actually able to enjoy these technologies, get it up and running. It's with minimal effort. Just make sure that you use it for the real use case, not having to waste time on some of the things like rebalancing or backup, recovery, failover, upgrading and patching. Because sometimes when we've seen that when there's really big scale, it can take a few days, sometimes weeks, depending on how agile the team is, right? This is where we're trying to always look at it. It's not, we're not trying to say you shouldn't do it. What we're saying is, we can support you using these technologies, and so you can be able to enjoy and really develop over it, and focusing on the innovation that companies are looking for.
And just to add one thing, and this is maybe this is not known to many people, but it's also something to proudly say as a European, which is we are 2 European companies doing this. And open source allows us to also challenge the perceived de facto standards of using all these major international providers who dominate certain markets, certain communities, but to basically give it a European first spin, which is something that I think is incredibly exciting. Yeah, not just for European companies, obviously, but you know, Europe and innovation. I think that's a double-edged sword to some degree. Yeah, I think everybody has seen the meme where this like bottle cap thing is being referred to as European innovation. But I think having the ability to leverage open source and provide innovation from Europe to Europe and the world is actually something to be incredibly proud of as well. And from a risk management perspective, now I wouldn't go that far, obviously, but it is a very mitigating risk type thing as well. And so technically speaking, how this would work now, technically we would have a Q&A. We had a bet, right?
Yes,
we had a bet earlier.
We did.
So we're debating this down backstage. So let me ask you a question. Is anyone here who has a question? Because we want to win a bet. Because we said what happens when you put 2 salespeople in front of an audience that is incredibly smart? Nobody's going to ask a question because they know the answer is not going to satisfy and or answer the question. So what we thought was that there's a break after this. Yeah? And I think we got the message across. So if you want to learn more about Aiven, please welcome, visit their booth. It's amazing. It's super cool stuff. You go to the Ververica demo thing that Dawn talked about later. And with that, if you give us standing ovations, here's our deal. Yeah? You have a 15-minute longer break. How's that sound? Thank you very much, you all.
Thank you.
Whoa, super, yay! That's exact goal.
Yeah, we did it.
Yeah.